Amazon One Medical presents Painful Thoughts.
I've been on hold to make a doctor's appointment for 23 minutes now. The automated voice has told me 47 times that my call is very important to them. I'm starting to think that they don't think my call is important at all.
With Amazon One Medical 24/7 virtual care, you'll get help fast without having to remain on the line to make an appointment. Amazon One Medical. Healthcare just got less painful.
This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. When you visit the doctor, you probably hand over your insurance, your ID, and contact details. It's just one of the many places that has your personal info. And if any of them accidentally expose it, you could be at risk for identity theft. LifeLock monitors millions of data points a second. If you become a victim, they'll fix it, guaranteed, or your money back. Save up to 40% your first year at lifelock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
Hey, Olivia from Olly here to help you ease into all things back to school. Homework, meal prep, and pickup duty piling up? Goodbye Stress Gummies help you keep your cool. Start the day with Kids Multi and Probiotic for digestive and immune system health. They'll love to take them, and that makes mornings easier. When back to school gets real, Olly helps you deal. Find these and more at olly.com or retailers nationwide. These statements have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. This product is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease.
There's been no end of stories of ridiculous judgments coming out of our court system over the past few weeks, and we wanted to talk about that today on the Full Comment Podcast. Hello, welcome to the podcast. My name's Brian Lilly, your host. But before we got to getting to this podcast about the ridiculousness of our court system, of course, we had the big verdict in the trial in London, Ontario, of 5 former Hockey Canada players and a young woman accusing them of sexual assault. So to help us unpack all of this, to look at the good, the bad, and the ugly of our judicial system, 2 National Post columnists, Selley and Jamie Sarkonak, join me now. Welcome. I wasn't planning on talking about the Hockey Canada verdict, but I'm not sure if people should have been shocked. It appears many were, that it was a not guilty verdict. Jamie, I know you're writing on this, so let me start with you.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like justice was done. That was my first impression. Closely reading the facts, it seems like a regretful night for everyone who was in the room, to be honest. And I can see why the complainant felt shame afterwards. The guys didn't emerge unscathed either from their side of the story. It was awkward. It was something they especially regretted after, when they started considering the consequences, even though they felt they appeared, based on the facts and the evidence submitted, that they were confident they had consent, but still it was not a fun event looking back for them. But ultimately what happened was the judge found that the complainant, the girl, had consented. So it's not that she just couldn't prove that sexual assault happened. She actually found that consent had occurred. So,
well, this is Superior Court Justice Maria Carroccia. So it was a woman hearing the case, a woman rendering the verdict. And reading from my son colleague Michelle Mandel's piece, she talks about how Justice Carroccia said that she just didn't buy the testimony of EM, and she points to testimony that the woman was acting in a sexually forward manner when she was masturbating in this room full of men and asking them to have sex with her. Like you say, this is a regretful night for everyone, but it doesn't necessarily mean that a law was broken. Morally, it's all repugnant, but was there a criminal code violation? That's something different, and I am hearing a lot of voices saying women were let down in this verdict again.
Yeah, that's not my take. My take is that this is good for women, because when you have decisions like this, when consent is so clear and the judge finds that, I truly think justice was done here. This helps maintain integrity in the cases of sexual assault that are serious, that are just horrific. I mean, there's plenty of sexual assault that goes on that is just terrible and, either doesn't get prosecuted or the guy gets prosecuted and gets something like conditional just discharge, which I've written on a case like that before. That's terrible. So, yeah, when judges correctly draw lines like this, it's good for women.
Chris, it appears that the London Police Service, who investigated this case years ago, this goes back to 2018, it looks like they got it right when they closed the case and said, we don't see enough evidence to warrant charges. And of course, it had to be opened back up after reporting that Hockey Canada had paid the woman to, settle a dispute. Apparently, the players were not informed of that. Hockey Canada did it themselves. There was a lot of outcry, and police had dropped the ball, and prosecutors weren't being strong enough. Well, looks like the public outcry may have been incorrect.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly looks to me, and it looked all along, that the fact that they were prosecuting this so many years down the line, after initially deciding there wasn't sufficient cause to go to court, was the right decision. I mean, I don't think anything really changed. The judge's ruling was so emphatic, as Jamie said. It wasn't just reasonable doubt. I mean, I always expected that there would at least be reasonable doubt, but an affirmative finding that she consented. I mean, that's as close to innocent as you can really get, with a not guilty plea. I hope that they learned some lessons. I mean, they're older now, but you would hope that the younger hockey players would learn a lesson from this, which is that kind of stuff is, well, I think you used the word repugnant, and it is. It was repugnant behavior. And
If you're acting worse than a character in White Lotus,
yeah,
rethink your actions.
yeah, and some guys walked out, right? Some guys went in and were like, "Whoa, I don't want anything to do with this." So it wasn't like everyone was, um, party to this crazy scene. But I think the interesting theory, or the interesting issue going forward now, I suppose, is what does hockey learn from this? I mean, the players are still suspended by the NHL.
They're still ineligible for playing. 4 of them had their contracts. Well, I guess they just weren't renewed after they were charged, and they're all banned from playing.
Yeah, I think officially they're banned from playing pending the appeal period. So if the Crown decides not to appeal, then they might be allowed back. But I mean, I don't have a lot of sympathy for them on that. I mean, you're allowed to not sign players who you think are morally repugnant, not just who are criminals.
Yeah, no, the NHL is well within their rights to do that. I'm not sure that I would want my daughters around any young men acting like this, but I also know that I wouldn't want my daughters acting in the way that EM did in this. As Jamie said at the beginning, a regretful night for all. What does this do for the reputation of the justice system, though? Jamie, you said that they got it right, but there's still going to be an outcry, and we are hearing it, that women just aren't believed. Justice, actually, let me read this, because Justice Croce did address that issue of you've got to believe women, you've got to believe the victim. And she wrote, "In approaching this task, I am mindful of the words of Molly J. in R.V. Nitsnik at paragraph 17, quote, although the slogan believe the victim has become popularized of late, it has no place in a criminal trial. To approach a trial with the assumption that the complainant is telling the truth is the equivalent of imposing a presumption of guilt on the person accused of sexual assault and then placing a burden on him to prove his innocence. That is antithetical to the fundamental principles of justice enshrined in our Constitution and the values underlying our free and democratic society." Your thoughts, Jamie?
I agree. She states how it is very clearly. I think when you have this movement of like there's a movement of EM supporters, and that's fine. I think solidarity with a complainant is okay, but they were yelling at the players as they were leaving the court, was the report. And also there was one of them, while one of the defense lawyers was giving a statement, she was kind of standing behind her with a sign that said, it was some message of support to EM. This woman was eventually moved out by security, but
I understand feeling sympathy for EM.
I do too. It's the conduct of this group, and I think it reflects poorly on them. I'm not sure that they fully understand how justice works in Canada, and I think their expectations for how a justice system is supposed to work with one particular crime, because they don't want these they don't want these kind of standards that they want for sexual assault to apply to any other crime. It's just purely sexual assault. And it's a total corruption of the Canadian justice system. This idea that we need to sort of put our thumbs on the scale to make it much harder for a sexual assault accused person to defend themselves. You know, there was some talk when I was watching the CBC feed. I believe it was one of the advocates on the so-called EM side talking about how she was never not believed like this before, and it shouldn't. There was some sort of injustice in that she had to go up and testify to her side of the story, and that's absurd to me. If it's an assault case, the victim should have to go up and make her case, and it doesn't feel good to be cross-examined, but that's kind of what you have to go through if you're going to throw a man in jail for your story.
I understand that have been years of women not being treated fairly in the court system, but you need to testify. Someone has the right to face their accuser in court, and to do away with that would be a miscarriage of justice. It appears that we're all in agreement on this case. So let me turn to one of the cases that I wanted to bring us together to talk about, and I think we've all taken a stab at this in various columns. And that's the Supreme Court decision of just over a week ago, where they have made it virtually impossible to convict a young offender of an adult crime. So I'm going to read to you the details from the case that I had in my column. The case revolves around a young man identified in the judgment only as I am. In January of 2011, I am and at least 3 other men approached a 17-year-old identified as ST while he was shoveling snow outside his family home. They attacked ST, stabbing and striking him repeatedly and leaving him to bleed out with 12 stab wounds and 10 blunt force injuries. They then burst into the home where, according to the Ontario Appeals Court, they attacked the victim's mother. Here's the quote from the Ontario Appeals Court decision that upheld his adult sentence. The first man to hit ST's mother in the head twice with a gun. The second man to enter punched her and forced her to sit on a chair in the interior porch with her head between her knees. The men left the home when the victim's father and brother arrived. They had planned this attack on ST to try and get a gun, and IM, who was eventually convicted after returning to the country after 2 years away because he fled the country, he was 17 years, 5 months old when he did this. He bragged about his role in this to his friends. He disposed of evidence, and the Supreme Court said that the current legislation, which says a judge must be satisfied, that is the language, satisfied, that the Crown has shown them, the young offender, to have the moral culpability of an adult. They said, no, you've got to prove that beyond a reasonable doubt, even though, as Justice Cote put in her dissenting decision, Parliament had considered this idea at least twice in the past bunch of years and rejected it. This is the Supreme Court at its worst, Chris, in my view. This is liberal judges putting liberal interpretations of the law into place, and there's no recourse unless we use the notwithstanding clause.
Well, yeah, I mean, I would agree with you that it's just a terrible decision, and that the dissent just tears it to shreds, politely, but nevertheless tears it to shreds. And I can't imagine being one of the other 7 judges and reading that dissent and thinking, nah, you would have to basically reject the whole idea of parliamentary supremacy. Now, I suppose maybe that ship has sailed, but this was a particularly glaring example of the Supreme Court just not caring what Parliament's intent was, and the intent was, this is sometimes not true in some cases where it's not that easy to figure out what Parliament's intent was. But in this case, it was debated over and over and over again. There were committee transcripts. All of the points had been discussed and debated back and forth, and they came up with this standard of being satisfied. And the Supreme Court just said, nah, no, it's not good enough.
Now, I'll point out, Jamie, that it was Justice Nicholas Kazarer who wrote for the majority, and he's a Trudeau appointee. But there were Harper appointees that agreed with this as well. But I had a different post that just criticized Stephen Harper's horrible record on judicial appointments, but that's another story. But we clearly have an issue with the court just deciding that Parliament doesn't matter.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what we do about it, as you say. I'm not sure. Was this? I guess it must have been a charter case. So yeah, I mean, you can't use the notwithstanding clause on everything. But I think it's long past time that we remove the taboo about it, because they're completely off the rails, and I it's really disturbing. What do you do when your Supreme Court has just completely usurped authority, and suddenly the Chief Justice has a giant bust of himself in the lobby, and he says he doesn't know who paid for it. I mean, it's just they're behaving so oddly. Like, they're always going out on these junkets. They're traveling all around the world. They're hearing fewer and fewer and fewer cases every year. Meanwhile, I mean, they just seem to be drunk on their own splendor.
Well, look, I don't know about you, Chris, but I know that I've got a giant bust of myself in my front hall done up to make me look like Caesar, and I don't know who paid for it. It just showed up one day. So I don't know why you wouldn't believe Chief Justice Richard Wagner.
Yeah, well, I mean, the funny thing about that is, well, the whole thing is funny, but I mean, he wasn't interested. He didn't want to know.
Someone's sending me a bust or a statue of myself. I'm asking who.
Yeah, is there a return address on that? Like, can we get some info here? I mean, it's just, I mean, Wagner was obviously a terrible, terrible appointment by Harper.
So one of the first cases that was heard after he was appointed, not as Chief Justice, but to the court, was a case called Loyola, where Loyola College in Montreal, a Catholic school, which had been told by the Quebec government that it could only teach Catholicism as if it weren't true and from a secular point of view, they challenged that. And Wagner actually wrote the decision that said, no, the Quebec government's right. Well, the Supreme Court hears the case, and he obviously had to recuse himself from it. But every single one of his colleagues signed on in a unanimous decision denouncing him. And that happened shortly after he was appointed. I was furious when Harper appointed him. But, I mean, beyond Wagner, there is a disturbing trend that the Supreme Court has taken on where they're knocking down laws not based on the case in front of them, but on a hypothetical. And it's a disturbing trend for me because, one of them was a guy who's stoned out of his gourd, is in Alberta, stoned out of his gourd, and starts firing a gun into a home where a husband and wife and their 2 young children are sleeping. And I believe he also shot at a car driving by. And And so he was facing all these charges. He was facing a mandatory minimum for, shooting into a dwelling. And the Supreme Court looked at it and said, yes, but if this had been, I believe the hypothetical they used was someone with an airsoft gun. Like, it was an absolutely ridiculous hypothetical, and they used it to strike down the law.
I think it was a young person too. They painted a picture of just a kid with a BB gun.
Yeah. I mean, Jamie, this brings the system of justice into disrepute. I also think that the decision last week did, but they are literally changing the law based on a made-up case rather than the one in front of them.
Yes, and it also, just to go back to that, kid with a BB gun situation, imagining that he actually gets charged, which that's questionable. There's a lot of filtering that goes on the Crown side before it makes it into a courtroom. There's a lot of diversion. There's a lot of, Crowns are a lot more likely for that kind of first time, just kid doing something stupid situation to divert it, to not take it all the way. And considering that's a hypothetical and it never made it all the way, we're in Canada, I'm sure a kid has hit a house with a BB gun before. Seems that the system was working as intended. Crowns with common sense, applying their duty to their job correctly, aren't going to put that little kid in, or that child probably through, not child, young adult, but that kind of dumb 20-year-old situation probably isn't going to find its way up. So yeah, we're going to have the court then imagine this scenario and then recreate Canadian law to suit their morals. Meanwhile, the rest of the population is like, are you kidding me? This is absolutely absurd.
It's like the bail situation. We've been reporting on it for years, and I remember being told, oh, no, it doesn't happen. Doesn't happen. We'd show them the stories from the Sun based on, the local Toronto courts. Oh, yeah, I guess that's a problem. We'll take a quick break. When we come back, I want to get reaction from both of you on Ottawa Crown Attorney Dallas Mack. Let's make that name famous. He's the guy who's behind the office that decided 7 years and 8 years for convictions of mischief was appropriate. Back in moments.
Choice Hotels get you more for your money so you can maximize any road trip. Let's get real close to hear the maximum sizzle of Comfort Inn's free hot breakfast. Maximized. Check into more. Book direct at choicehotels.com.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive, America's #1 motorcycle insurer. Everything is more exhilarating when you're on your motorcycle, just like your bike is more protected when you choose Progressive Motorcycle Insurance. They offer coverage for your bike, starting as low as $75 per year. And they keep things affordable, with discounts like paid in full, multi-policy, and responsible driver. So raise your kickstands and get to quoting at Progressive.com to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. $75 premium is for state minimum coverage. Not available in D.C. Discounts not available in all states or situations.
Hi, I'm Cyndi Lauper. My scalp was covered with psoriasis, which could lead to psoriatic arthritis. But Cosentics treats both.
Cosentics secukinumab is prescribed for adults with moderate to severe plaque psoriasis 300 milligram dose and adults with active psoriatic arthritis 150 milligram dose. Don't use if you're allergic to Cosentics. Before starting, get checked for tuberculosis. An increased risk of infections and lowered ability to fight them may occur, like tuberculosis or other serious bacterial, fungal, or viral infections. Some were fatal. Tell your doctor if you have an infection or symptoms like fevers, sweats, chills, muscle aches, or cough, had a vaccine or plan to, or if inflammatory bowel disease symptoms develop or worsen. Serious allergic reactions and severe eczema-like skin reactions may occur. Learn more at Cosentics.com or 1-844-COSENTICS.
Cosentics works for me.
Ask your doctor about Cosentics.
This is Tristan Hopper, the host of Canada Did What?, where we unpack the biggest, weirdest, and wildest political moments in Canadian history you thought you knew and tell you what really happened. Stick around at the end of the episode to hear a sample of one of our favorite episodes. If you don't want to stick around, make sure you subscribe to Canada Did What? Everywhere you get podcasts.
Dallas Mack is a name most people outside of Ottawa's courthouse haven't heard, but everyone should know it. He is the Crown attorney that decided that a sentencing recommendation for Freedom Convoy organizers Tamara Litch and Chris Barber of 7 and 8 years was wholly appropriate. Now, I get that this is a highly charged political case. A lot of emotions at play, and I've watched the online reaction to me calling this ridiculous. But to me, this is just incredibly political. First off, Mack, who is the lead Crown attorney for the city of Ottawa, is not the lead prosecutor on this case. But there's no way that his prosecutors would be asking for a 7 and 8 year sentence without his direction and or approval. And to me, Jamie, this just shows that this is a completely political prosecution. You don't have to like the convoy, you can hate the convoy, but you can also look at this and say, that is beyond ridiculous. Even Paul Champ, the lawyer for people trying to sue Leach and Barber, has called this ridiculous.
Of course. I mean, the fact that I could kill someone at a LRT stop in Edmonton and get fewer years in prison is just, compared to a mischief
and that happened,
charge.
if you want to fill people in.
Oh, yeah, that happened. And what I would say is a more sketchy individual who has the benefit of a court system that hears out his so-called background circumstances and then decides on a incredibly soft sentence. And then, of course, there's things like statutory release, which ensure that you don't spend that whole time period in jail. Versus a mischief charge where, first of all, no one was killed. That's a very low bar, but I think that's a significant one. And it was more of a protest. So it seems on its face utterly unfair. And you kind of wonder, what are the priorities of these people in prosecutors' offices, at least some of them?
I don't think that Justice, what I believe her full name is Heather Pickford McVeigh, I may have gotten the middle name wrong. I don't think that she's going to go for this, but we won't know until October 7th, Chris. And, I can't think of a more ridiculous prosecution that has cost so much money. And I know that, opponents will say, yes, but they cost the city of Ottawa a lot of money. Okay, well, we're spending tens of millions of dollars to prosecute them on mischief, and we're justifying that by how much money it cost. Well, there's also a civil case trying to get that money out of them.
Yeah, I mean, it is at the very least baffling. I mean, in isolation, I mean, even if you wanted to look at it as sort of fomenting treason or something, that's not the charge. It's mischief, and
But a lot of people don't get that and still think they tried to overthrow the government.
Well, I guess that's right. But if that was the charge, that would be the charge. You don't get charged with mischief for trying to plan an insurrection. Well, maybe you do. Maybe you do in Canada. I don't know.
A memorandum of understanding saying the government should be replaced is misguided as that document was, and is illiterate of how our society and democracy works as it was. It is not an insurrection to say, I think we should change the government, and here's how.
Yeah. No, and I think that it's impossible, I agree, to think of an explanation other than that it's political. Because and then if the judge doesn't go for it, I mean, that's going to be really interesting, because you see, you constantly see the Crown and defense agreeing on sentencing recommendations, some of them absurdly lenient, including that 1 day in jail for the terrorist who just came back from Syria. And usually, and I've never understood that, right? Like, I don't understand. Like, isn't this supposed to be an adversarial system? Shouldn't you, like, when there's a plea bargain, obviously they'll agree on terms. But even when there's not a plea bargain, sometimes they'll have joint sentencing recommendations. And it's like, I don't know, maybe I've been watching too much Law and Order, but aren't they supposed to be, going at each other, trying to get the longest sentence, and the defense trying to get the shortest sentence? I mean, I think all of these things really bring into question exactly how this all works. And I don't think Canadians understand it, and I'm not sure that we'd like the answer if we got it.
I believe it was you, Jamie, posting on X a whole bunch of different examples of people getting lighter sentences, or in several cases that we've seen recently of people getting their sentences suspended or downgraded to ensure that their immigration status is not affected. That's an outrageous situation.
Yeah, and we can, I think, thank Chief Justice Wagner for that, because he authored the leading decision at the Supreme Court on using immigration status as a discount factor.
Okay, I didn't know that. Can you tell us a little bit more there?
The case is called RV Pham, PHAM. I believe it's from 2016. And in that case, they were interpreting the criminal code, because the criminal code says, you can take you must take the accused background factors into consideration when you're coming up with a fair sentence. And in this case, his immigration status was going to eventually, or it was going to be in jeopardy, I suppose, if he was sentenced a certain way over a certain amount. Where there's all these ways that the immigration system works, and there's thresholds for your sentence, and he was going to be over threshold, which was going to make his prospect for staying in Canada a lot worse. And the judge didn't consider that as part of those background factors, and the Supreme Court said that was an error and that it must be considered. I mean, it did say that if it's outrageous, if the discount you would have to give is outrageous to keep this person in Canada, then don't go that far.
Oh, that's nice.
But it's like, if they're more borderline, it says, if they're closer to that, where it would be reasonable to not do that, then you should take that into consideration, meaning you should give them that discount. So you had a situation, it was in Calgary, I think a couple years ago. There was a girl at a club, and a guy from India kind of came up to her, and he just put his hand on her skirt and he groped her in her genital area. And that is sexual assault. It's literally a sexual assault.
Yes.
But in Calgary, the judge gave this guy a conditional discharge because, he's like, well, you're temporarily here and you could be deported automatically. So
good.
We want to give you a chance. And to that, I think, well, talking about how women, the impact of the Hockey Canada decision on women, I think ultimately that was fine. But a case like this where the guy actually walked up, it was plain as day. It wasn't in question that she wanted her genitals to be groped in the club by a random guy who just walked up to her. We're giving him a second chance to stay in Canada to do it again now. So great.
This takes us back to Wagner is Stephen Harper's worst appointment ever, and a horrible Supreme Court judge. But on the issue of deportation or not, I say deport them. I say this as the child of immigrants. I'm sorry. If you aren't willing to live by our societal rules, why are we letting you stay?
Well, exactly. And it's good for the immigration system, too, to be able to say that we can, with swiftness, reject your stay in Canada if you violate these important moral standards that we have. These are important to us. Don't walk up and sexually assault a woman in public. I think that's a very low bar, and if you cross it, okay, you're out of here.
Sorry, you haven't been approved to stay yet. You're gone.
Exactly. I don't think that this is even controversial remotely, but
except
in
with our
judicial circles, exactly. Yeah, I don't know if it's the bubble effect. You're in a certain milieu, and everyone thinks a certain way, and maybe it's just this self-radicalizing effect, but it seems to be normal to them to pull out all the stops to keep these people in Canada.
Chris, should we be deporting people that break the law when they're not citizens yet?
There's two things that stand out to me about these cases. The first is that the judges completely ignore why we have the rule. I mean, we made this rule. We presumably had some reason for making the rule, but they just, that if your sentence is over, I think it's 3 years, or if it's long enough to go to a federal, whatever it is. If you get a sentence over a certain threshold, then you're subject to deportation. Well, we made that rule. So it's not up to judges, or shouldn't be up to judges, to just pretend it doesn't exist, but they do pretend it doesn't exist. The second thing that strikes me is that what you're going to find is that Canadian citizens get harsher sentences for the same crime than non-citizens, which is, a ludicrous prospect. In the same, it's sort of a little of the same genre, I guess, as the Gladue reports, where I don't have a problem with taking it into account if someone was born with fetal alcohol syndrome and had a horrible upbringing and had no chance really to make it to make good. Then at least for the first two offenses, say, I can see taking that into account. But not but everyone, like lots of people, it's not just Indigenous Canadians who grew up in those circumstances. There's no reason to make it race specific, but our justice system is just larded with these weird things that I can't remember who said it earlier, but like it's not controversial. They're only the people in the Supreme Court's bubble think these are good ideas. I mean, my favorite decision, I'm not going to remember which one it is, but the Supreme Court wrote one. Oh, it was the Alexandre Bissonnette, the guy who shot up the mosque in Quebec City,
yeah.
a few years ago, and the Supreme Court quashed the consecutive sentences that he had. They said, I can't remember how many years it was without parole, 40 maybe, and they said that to maintain this rule would bring the system of justice into disrepute. And it's like, what?
No.
No, that's completely the opposite of the truth. Like, what planet are you living on? And so you have the Supreme Court making decisions based on pure fantasy, and they're writing it down.
Well, pure fantasy and their own political viewpoint.
I suppose, yeah. Although, I mean, one of the problems with the Canadian legal profession is that it's just not as diverse politically and ideologically as it is in the U.S. Not even close.
If I can add a third factor, there's a problem too with Parliament just completely bending like a wet noodle when the Supreme Court makes rulings like this, like in IM or like in RV Fam or the Queen and Fam, which is the immigration case. We have a Parliament that could enact the notwithstanding clause. The Prime Minister could have said something about the IM case that just came out that pretty much threw adult sentences for youth in the garbage. But we have complete silence and it seems to be like a lack of interest in sticking up for the principles that Parliament decides to govern the country with, So if they're just going to accept everything the Supreme Court says without pushing back ever, of course the Supreme Court's going to get a bit maybe power hungry and walking out of the boundaries it should have.
We've got a government that is, basically molded by the Laurentian elite, and that the Laurentian elite in this country believes that it is morally wrong to use the notwithstanding clause, that it is unconstitutional, despite being part of the Constitution, unless, of course, it is invoked by Quebec, in which case, crickets. So that's the reality of the situation. Since we're doing a hodgepodge of criminal and justice insanity, let me bring up this story from Toronto, just over a week or so ago, the murder of 71-year-old grandmother Shanaz Pestanji. She's just loading her groceries into her car when a 14-year-old walks up, demands the car keys. She refuses to give them to her or to the young man, and so, as he puts it, he yoked her. She died, and we knew the name of the 14-year-old, and his face was plastered everywhere for several days. And now he has been arrested, and we can't mention his name or show his image anymore. The guy was out on bail for carjackings when this happened. And this is the reason that we need bail reform. It's example, 8,948. Bail reform is needed now. This guy should have been behind bars. We will get to the full story one day of what the system did to let him back out. But your thoughts on that, Chris, as a fellow Torontonian?
Clearly, we need bail reform, but I often think that one of the things that would really help is if we could light a fire under the justice system to make it work faster. Now, in the case of a young offender, they're probably not going to go to jail for that long anyways, unless we do something about that. But there's so many cases where, people are out on bail for sort of 8 months or 9 months, right? And it's one thing to keep someone locked up for 2 months awaiting trial. To me, it's a totally other thing to have them locked up for a year. Public safety should come first, and in extreme cases, that's going to have to happen, and it does happen. Although, again, probably not with young offenders. But this is an example of, this kid is clearly the kid who's been accused was bragging about it online. He's posing with guns. He is clearly, if not a full blown menace to society. Now, well, what am I talking about? He just killed a woman. He's a full blown menace to society, and was even before that. So, and one of the things that always strikes me about these cases is that there can never be any accountability, because we'll never know if he reoffends.
This is, we'll start with you, Chris, and then I want to hear Jamie's take. I'm shocked that this story of a grandmother being killed loading groceries into her car hasn't received more attention, more outrage, more outcry. I know there was the focus on him while he was still at loose, but other than that, it feels like people are just shrugging this one off like so many others.
Well, I guess, I don't know what else. You shouldn't shrug it off, but there's only so much that your average Torontonian can do about this, It's a horrible thing. She could have been murdered by an adult doing the same thing. It is certainly disturbing. It fits into a pattern of terribly violent youth crime recently in Toronto, which is genuinely disturbing and makes you wonder if there's something. I remember thinking this kid who's been accused would have been about 9 years old when the pandemic hit, and I'm not blaming the pandemic for anything, but I'm just saying, like, you're denied social contact. You're denied, a kid who's going off the rails is only going to go quicker off the rails, it seems to me, in a situation like that. But again, we're never going to know, because, we can cover the trial. We just can't name him. But then, as I say, we can never know if rehabilitation worked, however long or short the term was. We'll never know, because we won't be able to, his name will be sealed.
Mm-hmm.
Now we will know, of course, because it's interesting, right? More and more in these cases where you have a young offender identified and then instantly unidentified once they're arrested. People on social media are just not, they're not playing ball, right? You're Mario Kart 69412 is not adhering to a publication ban from an Ontario court. So that's a whole other kettle of fish. Is the youth justice in the modern era? But I think it all just I feel like we just need an inquiry into the entire justice system.
Well, as we've been discussing for the last 45 minutes, it is a mess. Jamie, did this story resonate in Western Canada? Was it, locally, of course, it's going to be on the news here, but, a shocking grandmother being stabbed by kid while, at grocery store seems like it's the type of thing that should grab national attention. Did it resonate at all?
I think there's an impression that Toronto is chaotic over here in Edmonton. Not that we don't have crime. There is crime out here too. But Toronto has, Chris says, has had a number of high-profile cases of youth, or I guess Toronto in the area has had these cases that are quite high-profile of youth committing such a vile crime. It's very hard for a regular person to just picture a kid doing such a thing. The thought of a 14-year-old acting that way is unrealistic. It's not even believable, I think, to normal people, because 14-year-olds are playing video games and sports. They're not stabbing.
They should be.
Exactly, yeah.
Although with this Supreme Court decision, maybe they'll all be recruited into gangs now.
Well, that's the thing, is there's certain lifestyles, certain types of people that get sucked into gang life early, and it's so isolated from the average person, and also from the average judge. The average judge isn't in circles where children get sucked up into gang life. So in the case of IM, he saw his crime as a stepping stone to a great criminal career. That was discussed in the case.
Yeah.
This 14-year-old, we don't know yet, but it doesn't look good based on those snippets of social media video that were going around. It seemed that there was some glorification of violence going on. Gangs are known to recruit young people because gangs know that Canada has very few consequences for young people. So it's good to offload a bunch of dirty work that can be done by minors to minors. And then, by the time they turn 18, they're a bit more fully fledged, and you can upgrade them to worse criminal activity. But this is a real thing that's happening. And, when they know to exploit a system like that, it's a sign that maybe you should look at the system a second time.
The system's in trouble.
Yeah.
Jamie, Chris, we have not solved the problems of the world or of Canada and its rotten justice system, but it has been cathartic to be able to talk and complain about it with you both, because we've all been writing about it, and I know the audience has been reading and hearing about it and feeling frustrated as well. So thanks for the time today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Full Comment is a Postmedia podcast. My name's Brian Lilly, your host. This episode was produced by Andre Prue. Theme music by Bryce Hall. Kevin Libman is the executive producer. Make sure you hit subscribe wherever you're listening, on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, wherever. Hit the subscribe button, leave us a rating, and give us a review. Thanks for listening. Until next time, I'm Brian Lilly.
Here's that clip from Canada Did What? I promised you. 2 years later, he was still opposition leader, and he lost again to the Pearson Liberals. Despite this, Diefenbaker doesn't resign as leader of the Progressive Conservatives, which put the party in an awkward situation that hasn't really happened before. The typical rules of a Canadian political party were that you stayed leader until you died or resigned. And if you lost twice in a row, you were supposed to do the honorable thing and step aside. But Diefenbaker just didn't, prompting the party to take the unprecedented step of forcing a party convention in Toronto for the singular purpose of crowbarring Diefenbaker out of the leadership. Diefenbaker shows up, pretends everything is fine, and gives a finger-wagging speech chastising his fellow party members for their disloyalty.
I followed this party when I didn't agree with policies. And I gave loyalty to leader after leader, because I believe that there is no other way.
He's politely cheered by the assembled conservatives and then abjectly humiliated in their subsequent leadership vote. On the first ballot, Diefenbaker gets a distant 5th place, and even then he refuses to admit defeat. If you want to hear the rest of the story, make sure you subscribe to Canada Did What? Everywhere you get your podcasts.